Went backwards instead of forward.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Rustomod. In this episode, we're going to try to get our frame ready to be stretched so that way it can fit our wheelbase of our Willys Wagon. So in the last episode, you saw us strip down the entire Jeep Wrangler frame and we're sending it off to get sandblasted. So now we just got it back from sandblasting, so we can start to prep this thing for paint. Alright, so we got our frame back from the sandblaster. It turned out pretty good, much better than what it was before, but it's starting to flash rust, so we're going to spray some paint on this thing, get it so it won't rust, and then I'm going to put it inside and then put it up on the lift so we can paint the underneath of this thing. But it turned out pretty good. There are some spots that need to be addressed. Overall, it's a pretty good solid start and much better than what it was before. So let's start painting this thing. Alright, look at the difference the sandblasting made on this frame. If you guys saw the last episode, you saw how gross and crusty this frame was. Got it sandblasted, put some chassis paint on it, and it looks really good. So this is a much better foundation for a project. Whenever you start welding on something and you get into rust, it definitely is not the best thing to weld to, or if you can even weld to it at all. So definitely putting some chassis paint on this thing will keep it from rusting, but we can sand it down if we have to weld any body mounts or anything to it, and it'll keep it from rusting if we have to sit this thing outside. So definitely a huge transformation in the frame. So now we can begin by trying to figure out how we're going to fit this Jeep frame underneath of our Willys Wagon. Like I said in the last episode, the wheelbase is a lot longer in the Willys Wagon than the Jeep is, so we're going to have to cut this frame and extend it to be able to meet the wheelbase of the body that we're going to be putting on top of this thing. So if you watched our last episode, you saw that we measured the wheelbase on of our Willys, and it measured to be 104 inches from the center of the axle to the front side of the axle. And we can mess with it a little bit by aligning the wheel wells up into the body. That way it gets a little bit better stance and everything like that. But the TJ Jeep that we used for our frame actually measures to be 93 inches from the same points. So that means that we're going to have to cut the frame and then extend it to be able to meet the wheelbase that we need so it can fit under our Willys Wagon body properly. So now we're just measuring up the Jeep TJ frame now that we have it up in the air, and we can measure all the points that we're going to need to be able to get this thing exactly square and cut it in the right spot, so that way whenever we weld it back together, everything is perfectly straight and we won't have any issues with the frame being crooked or anything like that. So measuring is a big key aspect in this. You measure it diagonally, straight, so that way when we cut it and weld it back up, we can measure it and make sure that we welded it properly in the right spot, and that way nothing has changed in our measurements.
Scan along the frame here, you see that there's no straight sections hardly at all. You got a little bit of a straight section right here at this body mount, and then it angles out, comes out, and then you get a little bit of a straight section here. So we got to extend this frame out about 11 inches or so. So we want to cut the frame in a straight section. That way we can use straight tubing in order to extend the frame. So this body mounts in a way we're not going to use these anyway. So I'm going to cut this off, cut that off over there. We'll measure, cut the frame, same spot on each side. Cut it in half, shake all the sand out of it from the sandblasting, and then we'll start splicing it together.
So now we got those body mounts cut off and we got our frame marked exactly where we want to cut it. so that way it's in a straight section, so we can add our tubing a lot easier than it would be if it was at a curved section.
All right, what we're going to do is we're going to tack these 2 bars on here, so whenever we cut the frame, it doesn't go everywhere, so we can maintain the original spacing from the frame. We're going to tack these on, then we're going to cut it, and we'll take it and dump all the sand that's inside of it from sandblasting, dump that out.
Alright, so we got these 2 big metal pieces tacked into place, and this is just to hold everything in square, so when we cut this frame, it doesn't bow out or change direction or anything. When we go back to weld it, it'll be in the exact same spot where we cut it.
Okay.
Alright, now that we got our frame cut, you can look inside the frame and see all the scaly rust and sand from when we got it sandblasted, and just rust from sitting inside the frame, getting water and everything else like that, and just sitting in there, and it created all this dirt and rust in this frame. So now we decided that before we weld this thing back up and everything, we got to clean the inside of this frame out really good, because if we don't, it'll just start rusting from the inside out, and it'll just get a lot worse over the years while we drive this thing. So we wheeled it outside, and we're going to dump it up with our forklift to be able to try to get all the sand and everything else out of this frame.
Alright, so we're going to try to put a rod in it and just get all this stuff out of it. It's a lot of rust and just a lot of sand from it being sandblasted. So, like you can see in there.
So you can kind of begin to see the process that we have to shove kind of a big piece of metal up there to try to get all this stuff out of there. It's just packed full with all the sand. So if you guys ever get anything sandblasted and you have holes in your frame or whatever you're sandblasting, make sure you thoroughly clean it out before you weld it up, because this stuff will just attract a bunch of moisture, and then it'll start to rust also from the inside of whatever you're sandblasting. So just a tip, make sure you guys clean your stuff out before you start welding it up.
So here is the rust that was inside in sand. Way more rust than sand, it looks like. Probably 1.5 inch tall pile inside the frame. Probably still a lot more in there, we can't reach it.
Alright, so now we got a pretty good job of cleaning the frame out. So now we're lowering it back down, gonna wheel it back inside, and then we're going to get the other half of this frame, and then we're going to wheel that half back outside and try to clean that out as well, because this stuff is definitely in every crevice of the first frame, so we want to get as much out as we can now before we do anything else to this thing. This is also another good point of why we welded those 2 bars on the front of the frames, because if we have to move them, or like I are doing now, raising them up, beating them with a hammer to get all this rust and stuff out, nothing's going to move in the measurements that we have. We can have them tacked into place, so that way our frame, when it goes back together, will be in the exact same spot that it was.
Alright, so we got this frame. It was all cleaned out and cut, so we're gonna wheel it back in. Same with this frame.
Alright, so now that we got the whole frames cleaned out, we can put it back where they were, and then we can start trying to figure out how we're going to add whatever section that we need to the frame to be able to line everything up so that way we can weld these into place now that they've been moved all around and everything like that, and they're in the exact same place that they were before we cut the frame in half. So that's pretty much what we're left with. We have the back half of the frame here where we have it all cut up, and then the front half is in front of it. We cut that whole thing in half, so now we're going to have to weld a tube and plate the inside of the frame so that way it's as strong as it was before we cut it, and I lengthen this frame, the wheelbase that we're going to need. So we're going to cover all that on the next episode, so make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe so you guys can see all the future Jeep content that we're going to have on the channel, and we can see what this Willys body is going to look like on this Jeep Wrangler frame. So keep an eye out for the next video. We post videos every Friday, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.